So today we're going to look at how to solve a quadratic equation by factoring. So in the red sentence it says you can find the roots of some quadratic equation by factoring and applying the zero product property. So I do have the property here, and it says if you are multiplying a times b and you know it equals 0, then a has to equal 0 or b has to equal to 0. One of those two variables or one of those two binomials, we're going to work with that today, has to equal to 0, and we don't know which one it is, but we are going to equal them to 0 so we can solve by factoring. Let's go ahead and look at some examples. So we have two examples here. It says find the roots of the equation by factoring. So first, when you want to use this method by factoring, you want to have a 0 on the other side to use the zero product property. So looking at this here, I'm going to subtract 25 from both sides. And you always want to keep the value of a positive. So 4 is positive, so don't do anything to it. Don't move that to the other side. Just leave it where it's at. So we have 4x squared minus 25 equal to 0 here. Then you look at this expression, and it is a polynomial. You can say it's a binomial, and you want to factor. On my previous one of my previous videos, I show you guys that sometimes we do have difference of two squares. So notice 4 is a perfect square number, 25 is a perfect square number, and we have a minus in the middle. So you are able to factor this by using the difference of two squares. So to factor, you just have two parentheses here equal to 0. So this is the zero product property. We have a for the first parenthesis, b for the second parenthesis, equal to 0. We're going to take the square root of 4. So you put a 2 here with the variable, 2 here with the variable, and then you use the square root of 25. So that's 5, and 5 over here. To get the negative, we need a minus and a plus. So this is how you apply the zero product property. You take what's inside of the first parenthesis, so you just bring it down, and you're going to equal that to 0. You take the second parenthesis, what's inside of the parenthesis, and you equal that to 0. So now you should solve for x. So for this one, you add 5 to both sides. So 2x equals 5. This cancels. And divide by 2. This turns into a 1. So x equals 5 over 2. So that's 1, 0. For the next one, subtract 5 from both sides. Cancels. So negative 5 divided by 2 turns into a 1. So x equals negative 5 over 2. You can write the answers like this way. You have 5 over 2 comma and negative 5 over 2. In my class, that's okay. Do not use parentheses though. This is not an ordered pair. It's not a coordinate. So don't use parentheses. You can put a box around so I know that you found the answer. But once again, do not use parentheses. Now for the next example, we do have more terms. So first of all, we need to have a 0 on one side. And notice this is a. X squared has a. So it is positive. So I'm not going to do anything to it. I am going to subtract 48x to move it to the other side. I'm going to add, which is the opposite of the negative 32, add 32, so I can get it to the other side. So this is minus 48x over here, add 32 over here. So this is going to cancel, that's going to cancel. So we do have a 0 on the right side. On the left side, I want everything in order. I want the standard form. So the standard form of a quadratic equation, you always start with the x squared. So we have 18x squared minus 48x plus 32. So we do want to factor the trinomial, and using Jaime-Escalante's method, you have to multiply a times c. But if you notice that, we do have big numbers. So every time I see big numbers, numbers, I like to check if we have a common factor. So those coefficients, do they have a greatest common factor? So the one that I can find is 2. 2 is a common factor for those three coefficients, the numbers. So we're going to take out a 2, we're going to factor out a 2. So this is going to be 9x squared minus 24x plus 16 equal to 0. Then you look at the trinomial, the one inside of the parentheses, and you want to factor this one out. So the first thing I notice, 9 is a perfect square number, 16 is a perfect square number, so we do have a perfect square trinomial. So to factor, we're going to use the square roots. You have to bring down the 2 though, just bring down the 2 here. I'm going to have my 2 parentheses for my 2 binomials equal to 0. The square root of 9 is 3x and 3x. Square root of 16 is 4. And when you have a perfect square trinomial, you always want to use the sign in the middle. So we have minus and minus. So now you're going to factor. Now you're going to equal everything to 0. Everything you see equal to 0. So I do see a 2 here. I'm going to take 2 equal to 0. I'm going to take the parentheses, 3x minus 4 equal to 0. And then the next one, 3x minus 4 equal to 0. And you're trying to solve for x. So looking at the first equation here, 2 equal to 0. First, doesn't have a variable. Second, this doesn't make sense. It's not true. So 2 does not equal 0. They're not the same. So we do not pay attention to it. You can ignore it, you can say. But we can solve for x over here and this equation. So you add 4 to both sides. Cancels. So 3x equal to 4 divided by 3. It turns into a 1. So x equals 4 over 3. This one, guys, 3x minus 4 equal to 0 is the same equation as this one, 3x minus 4 equal to 0. So the answer is going to be the same. So for this equation, x is also 4 over 3. And you guys notice that the answer is repeating. Sometimes that can happen. You can have 2 different answers, 2 different roots, or you can have same root. So when it is repeating, what that means, you only have one root. It is repeating, but that means you only have one root. So the actual root, the actual 0 or x-intercept, it has different names, is 4 over 3. Just one answer. I do have a couple more here, and we do have functions. We have g of x on the left side, we have f of x on the right side. So we want to find the zeros, and it says by factoring. So first, that name, g of x, you're going to turn it into a 0, so we can use the zero product property. We have a 3x squared plus 18x. Factoring, you can use Jaime Escalante's method. So you multiply 8 times c, but hold on, we don't have c. Okay, so sometimes you do not have that value, c. So what you have to do is look if you have a common factor. So first, 3, 18, yes, they do have a common factor, and you always want to look for the greatest common factor. So I'm going to put a 0 here. I'm going to have my parentheses because I am going to factor, and 3 is the greatest common factor, but they also have an x in common. So I'm going to factor out the x. And every time you factor out a variable, you want to factor out the one with the lowest exponent, the variable with the lowest one. So when you factor the 3x, 3 goes into 3 one time. X, you took out 1x, you had an x squared, which means you have 2 x's, x times x. But if you take out 1, you just have an x left. 3 goes into 18, 6 times plus 6. This x went out of the parentheses, so you don't have an x anymore. So after you factor this out, the 3x outside the parentheses, you can use the zero product property. Now the 0 is on the left side. You can have it on the left side, you can have it on the right side, but what I'm going to take is everything here, everything what's outside and inside of the parentheses, and equal that to 0. So I'm going to take 3x equal to 0, which is the 0 here, to use the 0 product property. Take what's inside of the parentheses, x plus 6 equal to 0. And solve for x. So each equation has an x, so you can solve. So divide by 3, this turns into a 1, so x equal to 0. So that is one answer, that is 1 0, the value of 0. And you subtract 6 from both sides over here. So x equals negative 6. So we have the two zeros solutions, x-intercepts, 0 and negative 6. Now for the next one, I know that sometimes a lot of people don't like fractions, so let me show you guys how to solve when you have a fraction. First of all, this f of x, the name of the function, is just going to turn into a 0, because we're going to let x, or not x, f of x equal to 0, which is y. Y is 0. Everything else is going to stay the same for now. So we have 6x squared over 5. We have this fraction here, and this one over here. When you want to solve by factoring, you want to get rid of the fractions. So you are going to have a big parenthesis here. You are going to factor out the fraction with the negative. We do have a negative here, so we're going to factor out. So I'm going to take the negative out of the parentheses, and the denominator, notice it's every denominator is equal, so I'm going to take out the denominator. Now it is a denominator, so it's going to be under the fraction, and you just put a 1 on top. So that's the fraction you're going to factor out. A negative, because we have a negative in front of the a, and 1/5. So when you do that, first you need to change the signs of every term, and you keep the top of the fraction. So we have a 6x squared, positive turns into positive, so 6x squared. Let's change the sign. We have a 1x, change the sign, and we have 2 on top. So you take out the fraction and you keep what's on top of the fraction, and if you factor the negative, change the signs. We're not done, we have to factor. So I look at the trinomial inside of the parentheses, and I'm going to use Jaime Escalante's method. So step 1, you multiply a times c, which equals negative 12. Find two numbers that multiply to negative 12, and they do combine to the b term, the middle term, which is 1. So that's going to be 4 times 3, and 3 has to be negative, because when you multiply, you get negative 12. When you combine, 4 minus 3 equals 1. So that's your b term. Step number 2, you're going to make two fractions. So you take a divided by the first factor, which is 4. Reduce the fraction. So that's 3 over 2. So this is my first fraction. Then you take a again, which is 6, divided by the second factor, negative 3. And that's reduce. That's going to be 2 over negative 1. Do not turn this into a whole number. Jaime Escalante's, you need the fraction and the negative, keep it on the bottom. So step number 3, first of all, you bring down, it is an equation, so I'm going to write down 0 equals negative 1/5. 3x, you're going to put the fraction inside the parentheses. So 3x, 3 is in front of the x, 2 is after the x, this number is before the x, the bottom number is after the x, minus 1. So after you factor, you guys can solve. So I'm going to take 0 equals negative 1/5, 3x plus 2 equals 0, and 2x minus 1 equal to 0. Don't pay attention to this one, doesn't have a variable. When you solve for x on this one, you get negative 2/3. When you solve for x on this one, you get 1/2. Alright guys, I'll see you guys next time.